Personal finance practice problem using Excel. Future value of an annuity using non-annuity Excel functions. Prepare to get financially fit by practicing personal finance. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet and would like to follow along, note that we're down here in the Practice tab as opposed to the Example tab. The Example tab, in essence, being an answer key. We have the information on the left-hand side. We're going to populate that into the blue area on the right-hand side. First, starting off with the future value of an annuity function as we have seen it in the past, then breaking out that function into individual periods, which we will then have future value of one calculations to get an idea of how the two calculations are similar and related, and also because in practice it can be quite useful to break out the information into a year-by-year basis, both because it gives you more information about the annuity itself on a year-by-year or period-by-period basis, and because it allows you to have more complex type of scenarios. So let's see what we have over here. We got the payment of $1,000. We're going to say the rate is the 7%, and we have 5 periods, this time looking into a future value type of scenario. So we might have a situation where we're estimating how much we're going to be receiving in the future to try to see where we will be at the end of 5 years. In this case, we have nice even payments, and we can work that out. But you might imagine a situation where you have less even payments, and in that case, you won't be able to do a nice standard annuity calculation, but rather would have to do some combination of an annuity and something else, or just break something out year by year, which is very common in practice, something book problems don't often do given the fact that they try to take away Excel, and so you can't really use it to do that. But if you have Excel, it's very practical to set up your spreadsheets in this format. So let's take a look at it. We're going to say the normal future value of an annuity. We'll do this fairly quickly because we've seen it in the past. Will be negative future value, shift 9. We're picking up the rate, which is at 7%, comma, the number of periods, which is going to be 5 periods over here, and then comma, and we are using the payment portion because this is an annuity up top. We'll pick up the 5,000. That gives us our annuity of the 5,751. Now, if we just look at the cash flows, then obviously if we just said we had the 1,000 times 5, that would give us our cash flow of the 5,000, but because of the time value of money or the increase, if we're thinking of an investment, we would end up in a future period amount of the 5,751 according to the annuity calculation. I'm going to go ahead and format this one. Now let's break that same calculation into a year-by-year calculation. We'll do it this way. I'm going to say years 1 and 2. I'm going to select those 2 years and then use our autofill handle to click on the autofill handle and drag it on down to 5 years. Center that by going to the Home tab, Alignment, and Center. Then we'll just list out our payments again, which will be equal to the 1,000. I'm going to list each of them out one by one. So I'm going to say F4 on the keyboard and just copy that 1,000 down to the 5 periods. F4 giving us an absolute reference, $ before the B, $ before the 3. Enter. Putting our cursor back on that, going to grab the autofill handle, left click on it, drag it on down for the 1,000 all the way down 5 periods. Let's total this up. Total, which is going to be equal to the SUM of shift 9, up arrow, holding down shift, up, summing that column up, giving us the 5,000. Let's put an underline here, fonts group and underline. So now once we have this nice clean setup process, we can easily then do a future value calculation, but this time do it on a period by period basis. This is a little bit more complex than we saw with the present value calculation, because we're going to be going forward in time. We'll take a look at that shortly. But just note, if you set the table up properly, it's still pretty easy to do the future value calculation and be able to kind of copy that down. Also note that if it was an annuity, you might not need this payment column. You can simply do the future value and do an absolute reference of your data, 1,000 over here. But if it was some kind of system where you do not have even cash flows each year, then you'd want to set it up basically in this way. So it's common to kind of set up your payment flows over here and then line up the future value calculation next to it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do future value of 1 calculations for the 5 periods. And notice we're going forward, not backwards. I'm not trying to bring this back to time period 0. I'm trying to go forward to the end of the 5 periods. So that means this one is going to be a future value calculation that's going to be future value of 1 up 4 periods, 1, 2, 3, 4 periods here, instead of going back. So that complicates the formula a little bit when we compare that to the present value. This one starts at year 2, so it's got 1, 2, 3 periods to get to the future after 5 periods. This one starts at 3, 2 periods to get to period 5. So let's do this calculation, see what it looks like. It's going to be negative future value shift 9. We'll pick up the rate, which would be the 7%. When we copy it down, we would make that absolute reference, but I won't do that yet because we'll practice this a few times, comma, the number of periods. Now, this is where it's a little bit different because what we want here is 4 periods because we're imagining this starts at the end of year 1 because it's an annuity. So what we want is 4. You can type in 4. Let's start doing that first. Let's put the 4 there first and then comma. And then the payment would be this one. It's not a payment because it's not an annuity, comma, comma. The present value would be this 1,000. And then enter. And that would give us the 1,311 because we're increasing it for that 4 periods. However, I can't copy this down. If I was to take this and grab it and copy it down, then I've got this messed up thing. 1, because this moved down because I didn't make it an absolute reference. So I could make that an absolute or hit that one. And then also because I have to change this 4 because what I want it to be is 3 now because there's only 3 periods left. So the question then is, well, how can I set this up so that I can copy this thing down? And what you could do is you could say, all right, instead of having 4 there, what I want is to say this is going to be the 5 minus the 1. And then I can use the same kind of balance table. That'll come up with 4. The problem with that is when I copy it down, this 5 is going to move down. I don't want it to move down. This 1 is going to move down, and I do want that one to move down. So this first one right there, which represents the 5, I'm going to put an absolute reference on that F4, put in a $ before the G and 5, so that every time I copy this down, that one stays the same. This one moves down, so I should come up with 3 next time, which is what we want. Let's test that out. I'm going to put my cursor back on it, copy it down. And I didn't do an absolute. I'm going to go back on it again. This one right here, let's put an absolute reference on this %, which is our normal standard process. And then let's copy it down. And now it looks like it's doing what we want, right? So this subtraction problem is taking 5 minus 2, which is 3, which is how many periods we want because we're at period 2. We want 1, 2, 3 periods left. And then you can copy that down. It's a fairly complex formula, but once you understand it, it should be, you'll start to pick it up. So let's do it a couple more times and then we'll copy it down the rest of the way. So this one would be negative future value shift 9, rate would be that 7%, comma, number of periods would then be, I'm going to do it with this way, that would be the 5 minus the 2, which would be 3, comma, payment, no payment because it's not an annuity, 2 commas, future value, the 1,000, and enter. Let's do it 2 more times here, negative future value, shift 9, rate, the 7%, comma, number of periods is going to be 5 minus the 3, which gives us 2, which makes sense because if I start at 3, we got the 2 periods 4 and 5 left, comma, no payment because it's not a present value, it's not an annuity, so comma, the present value is 1,000. One more time, negative future value, shift 9, rate at the 7%, comma, number of periods is going to be the 5 minus the 4 or 1, comma, the payment, no payment, comma, the present value, the 1,000, and enter. Okay, now I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to do it one more time, being mindful of the absolute references so we can copy them down. So I'm going to delete it, do this one more time so we can do it with the absolute references. Negative future value, shift 9, rate 7%. Selecting F4 on the keyboard because that one is outside of our cell, $ before the B and the 4, comma, number of periods is going to be 5, but I want that not to move down. Here's the tricky one because that one is in our table, so that you would think that I don't need to do anything for that one because usually if it's in our table and not outside in the data, we don't need to do anything. But this one's a little tricky because that 5 is always the end date, so I want to make that one absolute. I'm going to select F4 on the keyboard and then minus the 1. That 1 is not absolute because I do want it to move down so that it's always 5 minus whatever year we are on, whatever period we are on. So we're going to say comma, and then comma again. The present value is that 1,000. I do want that one to move down, therefore no absolute reference. And so there we have it. Let's copy it down and see if it does what we would expect. I'll take the fill handle, drag it down 5 periods, and then I'll just double click on it, double check one of these and say, yeah, that looks like it's taking the 5 minus 4, or 1 would be there. The 7% is taking the 1,000, looks right. So it looks good. And then if we sum this up, we're going to then get in the outer column, underlining that font group and underline, we get once again to that 5,751. And we can see how each of those payments, as we now bring it into the future, results in a little bit less in terms of future value dollars, because it doesn't have the time to basically accumulate the 7% gain or increase that you're assuming will happen by the time we get to the end of the 5-year time period. Now we can do this again and format our table this way, where we can have the years up top, and we can have the payments on the side. Sometimes this is useful to do just in practice, and sometimes people just like to see it that way better. So we want to be able to format our tables both ways, so we can work with other people that format their tables differently, possibly. Format our tables with whatever way makes most sense with what we are doing, and so that we can follow along with anybody else who, once again, is formatting the table in whatever way they want to format the table. So we'll put our cursor on column C, drag on over to column I, and we're going to hide those cells, right-click and hide those cells, and then we'll do it again. So the payment is going to be equal to the 1,000. I'm going to select F4 on the keyboard, making that absolute so I can just copy that 1,000 through the 5 periods, putting my cursor back on that 1,000. You could do this with a keyboard, by the way, instead of the autofill. I could say Control-C on the keyboard, since we'll start practicing more geeky maneuvers here. Right arrow, holding down Shift, left, or right, selecting those 4 cells, and then Control-V, pasting it, and we get the same kind of process as the autofill, and you're more, you're impressing the geeks doing that. You're impressing the geeks, which is good. So then we're going to then do our future value calculation, which is going to be negative future value, Shift 9. The rate is going to be over here on the 7%. And let's do it a couple times. We would absolute reference that, but let's do it a couple times again. Comma, number of periods. Here's the tricky part. So we're going to try to do it this way so we can pick it up from our numbers. 5 minus the 1. We would absolute referentize the 5 so I can copy it over, but let's just keep it the way it is now. That means that it's going to be 4, which makes sense because we have 4 periods after period 1 here. Comma, no payment because it's not an annuity, so 2 commas. Present value is the one above it. Then I'm going to select Tab on the keyboard, which won't take me to the one under as Enter would, but to the one to the right. Negative future value, Shift 9, rate 7%, comma, number of periods is now the 5 minus the 2, comma, no payment, so 2 commas. Present value is the 1,000. Then we're going to select Tab on the keyboard and do it again. Negative future value, Shift 9, rate 7%, comma, number of periods is going to be that 5 minus the 3 to give us 2. I think that comes out to 2 if I'm doing my math properly. I'm not very good at doing them in my head because I use Excel all the time, but I'm pretty sure that one. Okay, in any case, there we have it. Now let's delete these and do it again, keeping in mind the absolute references necessary to copy this thing across. So let's do it again and say, okay, this is going to be equal to the future value, Shift 9, rate 7%. That one's outside the table, so I got to make that an absolute reference. I'm going to select F4 on the keyboard, $ before the B and 4. You only need a mixed reference, but an absolute reference is easier to think about, comma, number of periods. I'm going to do it this way. I want the 5. This is the tricky one, because that one, although it's inside the table, I don't want it to move because I want that end number to be the same. So I'm going to select F4 on the keyboard. I think I hit F5 or something. Something funny happened there. F4 on the keyboard. So there we have that. And then minus the 1, which will give us 4 periods. But this 1, I do want that one to move. Therefore, no absolute reference there. Comma, comma. Present value is going to be that 1,000, which I do want to move. So I'll keep that one as is. And there we have it. I didn't put a negative in front of the F. So let's put a negative in front of the F to make it a positive number. And then let's do our copying and pasting with the keyboard, Control-C instead of the fill handle. You could use the fill handle too. Right arrow, hold down Shift, and then right, 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 and then Control V, and there we have that. It looks good. I would double click on like a cell over here and say, is it doing what I want? Like there it is. And by the way, if you don't want to double click and you want to do that in a geeky way, you can hit F2 on the keyboard, F2 to see what's in there. And there we have it. And so, yeah, it looks like it's doing what I would expect. So now let's sum up this way. Let's sum these things up. Equals the SUM, Shift 9, and left arrow holding down Shift, left, 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 and Enter. And sum this up. Equals the SUM, Shift 9, left arrow holding down Shift, left, 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 and Enter. So there we have that 5,751 once again. Let's unhide our cells by putting our cursor on column B, dragging on over to column K, letting go, right-clicking on the selected area, and unhide. So there we have our calculations in multiple different formats, which, again, quite useful to be able to do that. Something you won't get in book problems oftentimes because they take away your spreadsheet. But in practice, you can do a lot, more complex projections and possibly get a better conceptual feel of what's happening from a period-by-period system or period-by-period process, which again, I think that can give you some more insights into how you're putting these things together.